All present and correct, sir. That's the British Army over there. Actually, 1st Battalion Coldstream Guards, which my father served in the late 50s, early 60s, when national service was still going in this country, which means you had to do at least 2 years compulsory, and then you had a reason to get out of it. I think they stopped national service in 1963.
Order! The officers!
Coldstream Guards are particularly known for their musical prowess, and my father, being a trumpeter in Coldstream Guards, went on to work with some famous Latin bands, including Chico Arnaz and Edmondo Rossi's Latin American Orchestra, to name but two. And I remember him telling me that in Edmondo Rossi's orchestra, it was nothing more than short of being a perfectionist, Edmondo Ross, because he liked the brass section to basically be like a machine going off. My dad told me, a machine gun. And if you listen to Edmondo Ross, occasionally you get that British Army feel, particularly in the percussive section, I've noticed. So it's worth having a look. There's quite a bit of YouTube stuff on Edmondo Ross and his Latin American Orchestra. So my dad did about 10 years with Edmondo Ross, and 3 tours of Japan as well, which they, because it wasn't too long after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, they had to cut out the American bit, so it was just known as Edmondo Rossi's Latin Orchestra. And my dad was telling me he got attacked a couple of times by older Japanese people, understandably, because they thought my dad was American, which he wasn't, he was British. But that generation, obviously, that suffered from Hiroshima and Nagasaki was still going. But despite that, they sold out in Japan, and they did 3 tours when my father was in it, at least. And my father went on to work with other bands, including James Last Orchestra, Bert Kaempfer Orchestra, another good German band. I always liked their string arrangements. And he also in this country worked regularly at Talk of the Town, BBC Radio Northern Orchestra, Ken McIntosh and Ray McVeigh's orchestra at the Talk of the Town. Used to work on the Sooty Show, and also with Nana Mouskouri, who I'm sure you know, Nana Mouskouri, a Greek singer, very, very popular. So the tourists who come up here today to see this wonderful parade of the British Army in the Coldstream Guards, I'm sure they think that life in the army is very, very nice and pleasant and glamorous. I can tell you it isn't. The whole thing thrives on discipline, and to get men to be as uniform as that, it takes a lot of discipline, bull in boots, what they know as bull in the army. And it's got better. I mean, today we have a thing called the Army Welfare Association, where at least soldiers have some recourse if they're in trouble, or if they have some sort of mental issue or psychiatric issue. I mean, many soldiers return suffering from PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And in my dad's time in national service, it was far harder, because you had some cruel sergeant majors, one of which was known as Sergeant Major Britain, who there was two that were particularly cruel who my dad hated. That was Sergeant Major Britain and another one called, wasn't too bad, called Major Pope. And he was known for waking young guys up 3 o'clock in the morning, spitting all over the gates, Buckingham Palace, and making them wash it off, just for his own amusement. You know, if you've ever seen that movie Full Metal Jacket, I'm sure it was probably worse than that in the British Army. And my grandmother used to tell me she used to come up here and see him quite proudly on parade and standing sentry duty outside Buckingham Palace, and also in the what's known, they still have it, the Trooping of the Colour, where the Queen, which is basically the Queen's birthday. I think it's around the 6th or 7th of June coming up. So he did 6 of those, did 6 years in the British Army. And but life inside, you have to be really a really tough cookie to survive in there, because in the army they try to break you, they try to put you under incredibly adverse circumstances which only the hardest can survive, because they know that that is what war conditions are like. And that's why probably the British Army gets its reputation as being one of the toughest to exist in many adverse conditions across the globe over the years. Crimean War, War of Independence, you name it, Palestine. So it's not exactly a holiday camp inside, and you have to bear in mind that in those days in national service, the soldiers didn't have any recourse. They couldn't go to the Army Welfare Association. There was no such thing as an Army Welfare Association who you complain to about bullying, etc. So it was really carte blanche, free range for, should we say, psychopathic officers to bully young men into submission. And then you send you out to a place like Cyprus, where the British Army were fighting the communists in Cyprus at the time, and my dad told me he became even more deranged out there. He didn't really go into what happened in Cyprus, but it didn't sound too good. But despite that, one thing he did take was being a wonderful trumpeter, and sadly he never conducted his own orchestras, but he did work with some of the biggest bands, and for that I think he was always grateful.